Okay.
Hello and welcome. My name is Paul Brighton, aka Seafood Boggy, and welcome to The Way of Conscious Mindfulness, a show about mind, body, and spirit, a mix between spirituality and science in a Taoist format. Tao means the way, the path, the balance. So this show is about the way of Michael Brazell. Now, before we go on to this great guest, one of the people, him and Brendan Cullington, Skull Babylon, who actually inspired me to be part of this show itself, I will pass you to the gracious, the wonderful, the magnificent Ethan Collins.
Thank you, Buggy. Hi, everyone. My name's Ethan. I have a business making basically touchstones for people's souls to help them remember in the form of clothes. And I will be a co-host on this show, and I'd like to pass you to the lovely Michelle. See, I'm getting excited, getting my words mixed up. To the nice and lovely Michelle Infinity, who will introduce our guest.
Beautiful. Thank you, Ethan and Paul. This is like so cute. We're like passing it like so properly. It must be Michael's energy. We're like, introduce the guest. It is my honor to present to you all Michael Brazell, who has come into my life more significantly in the last few months. But he is obviously a longtime soul brother because he is deep, deep friends with people that I care deeply about, which one of them is Skull Babylon, who he started the Paradigm Shift radio show with back in the day. And the other one is Phoenix, who I'm sure we'll get more about the magic that is Phoenix later in the show. But to talk about Michael, he was a PETA activist for several years, and he's also a witch. So he's well versed in the Anderson Feri School of Witchcraft. I think I wrote Anderson Feri Tradition of Witchcraft, a student and practitioner. And he would like to speak more about the bridge between spirituality and activism, and I can totally get where this is going, how the spiritual of us need more action in our lives, because through that action is the only way that we will get shit accomplished on this earth and actually making that happen. What else do I know? I also know that he has started to teach Vinyasa Flow Yoga, which is something that I am also passionate about, and has a love for Bhakti Yoga, which is the yoga of the heart, and is a part of my tribe in Bhakti Yoga, which is Krishna Das, Neem Karoli Baba, the Hanuman Temple, Ram Dass, and all of the philosophy that really has changed the consciousness of spirituality in the West completely. So without further ado, I will introduce you to Michael Brazell. Yay.
Yay. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Hopefully I live up to the expectations that were now placed upon me.
Of course you can live up to the hype. You are the hype. You are Dragon Dog. Well, that's my name for you, but that's probably a story for later. Anyway, please continue. What is you?
What is me? I'm a lot of things, and I'm a lot of no things, you know. I find that my path has been ever evolving. I never expected to be where I am now, but here I am. And through that journey, I've gotten to do some pretty phenomenal things, both things that were filled with light and love, and also things that were filled with shadow and depth. So for me, I just want to start with let's all take a breath together. I think that's always the best place to start. Let's just breathe for just a moment before we get started, and let's invite all of our parts to show up. I think that's part of the message that we'll be touching on today, just letting our parts all show up, even if it's just for this time that we're together. And then I'll just invite in God herself to encapsulate the discussion and to be present with us. Holy Mother, in whom we live, move, and have our being, from you all things emerge, and unto you all things return. Step with us through the gates of power, step with us in grace, and step with us in love as we move through this conversation today. Blessed be. So I don't know where to start. I'm always just here, you know. I think for me, I think it's important to talk about things like witchcraft and activism. And I think part of my journey coming into owning these parts of myself along the way, seeing the intersectionality of all my pieces and parts. I think sometimes there's a tendency for those of us who do spiritual work to compartmentalize ourselves. Like, over here is the vinyasa instructor, over here is the bhakti, over here is the witch, over here is the mystic and the healer. But to do that requires so much work to hold ourselves apart from ourselves. And for me, the journey has been letting all of those pieces bleed together in a way that lets me be more whole, that lets me be more embodied, and lets me be more authentic, not just in my own work, in my own life, but in the work that I do as a teacher, as a mentor, as a healer, and as a witch who does work in the public. For me, it's important to define some of the words a bit. So for me, like when I speak about being a witch, I'm not speaking for every witch that is out there. So for me, I'm not speaking for every activist that is out there. But I do notice a lot of things that have come up within our communities that are important to dialogue around. And for me, the definition of a witch is, we walk the edges, we hold the mysteries. My job is not to coddle old ideas and to be the person that instigates thought. Sometimes just by my own appearance. It instigates movement, it instigates presence, it brings people into whatever presence is for them at that moment. And I think we have to shake things up. And I think that's sometimes the job of the witch. It was the job of the witch in the old villages, to be the holder of mysteries. But there's also some fear in taking on those roles, because back then, you were burnt at the stake. When you would tell people you don't need an intermediary between you and God, you can just go to God, burn at the stake. Here, take these herbs, they will cure you. Prayer is good, but these herbs will also help. Burn at the stake. So we've come a long way, but we haven't. I think we're seeing now things shifting and changing faster than they ever have before. And it's important for us to lend our voice to those changes as they are happening. I spent quite a few years at People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals as a professional activist, getting out in the world and bringing awareness to the suffering of animals that are exploited for food, clothing, entertainment, research. So that also bleeds into my work in spirituality. And I think it's important for us to have these heavier, harder discussions in our spiritual circles. The world is changing, and we are part of that change. And we are not excluded from those bigger conversations around things like racism, around things like transphobia, Islamophobia. They are present within our communities just as much as they are present within the world around us. And as leaders and as people who are thought provokers, people who are edge walkers, we have to come out of the caves on the mountains and come down into the trenches. We can't stay, on our meditation cushions and our yoga mats anymore. We have to have these conversations because the world is changing, and we can't blanket everything with oneness, and love and light. We forget that love is messy, that love can be brutal, that love requires us to take an honest look at ourselves.
God, I like you.
Love is it's like the hardest thing to do, but it's the most courageous thing we can do. It always, and I saw a really good article before coming online speaking to All Lives Matter. And I see this a lot in our spiritual communities where we use that phrase. Well, all lives matter. Can't we just love and light? And it's okay for me to say that from a place of privilege, because if I view others as others, it's easy for me to say all lives matter. But to do the real work of spirituality means to see myself as someone who can support this movement and growth, and to say Black lives matter, to say trans lives matter, to say Native lives matter, in a way that supports growth, but also challenges these ideas that we can just love and light those issues away. We can't. Love and light is good, love is powerful, but action centered in love is even more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
As Thich Nhat Hanh said, we have to pray with our feet. You know, we can't just meditate the world into goodness. I wish we could. I wish it was that simple. It requires us having conversations not just with those who are closest to us or our communities, but it means having those conversations with ourselves. For me to look at where I hold privilege, to look at where I hold, where racism shows up in my spiritual practice and in my life. Because in order to make effective change in the world, it means we have to confront the systems that support, you know, the greater systems. Having these conversations in these communities because we feel that we'll be alienating people if we have those discussions. But by not having those discussions, we're actually alienating people. You know, it's important to let those voices be heard, especially in the context of the larger spiritual movements that are happening, because these things are very present in those communities. We'd only have to look back to, there was that group Evolve Fest that was around for a while, and they were always putting transphobic things on their wall. They were putting very hurtful, damaging things on their wall, and people seem to just ignore it. And we don't live in a time that we can just ignore those things anymore. So I'm going to keep talking while I let my dog out of the room, because the goddess that she is demanding my attention.
Dad,
open the door already. You know, life always intersects at these moments too. So yeah, so that's where I find my work happening. You know, and even like just in one-on-one consultations with people, it's my job to bring them to the edge in a very safe way, so they can explore those edges with love. You know, the path of the bhakti is the devotional path, the path of love. But it also means loving our shadow, loving the parts of ourselves that we most resist. It means owning those parts in a way that lets us live with them and not fight with them. I always go back to the phrase in Psalm 23, which is my favorite psalm, I prepare a table in the presence of mine enemies. It doesn't say I slay my enemies. It's I prepare a table. It's really sitting down with those parts of yourself, or even the people that are in your life that are disruptive, and sitting down and having those difficult conversations. That's where love begins. You know, love can fuel all those things, but only if we're willing to be vulnerable and courageous enough to have those conversations. So I think it's essential. You know, it's essential to look at people of color within our communities and to ensure that they feel safe, you know, in our communities. You know, we're seeing movements in the yoga community where people of color and people of varying body size have not been represented by many of the bigger media, yoga media. And it's voicing our concern and saying, look, you know, we have to change. We have to take accountability for causing harm. And we have to dismantle those systems that hold harm. And I think that's the work. That's the work all of us have to do. We can't claim to be moving in the higher consciousness and exclude. You know, when we say we blanket all lives matter, or why can't they love each other, we're really holding other away from ourselves. We're not really taking an honest look at why we're using those statements. And I think it's important.
Yeah,
we have to. You know, it's easy.
Baseline consciousness. The program that's running is the baseline consciousness. So, I mean, that's what we're getting trained with. So if you don't address that, then we're just like putting a Band-Aid on top of the cut that's not going to heal.
Right. Well, it's easy to like talk about the chakras. It's easy to, you know, lucid dream. It's easy to like leave the body and do all this like fantastic stuff, but magic happens when you start having these heavy conversations. You put your hands in the soil, and putting your hands in the soil means you're going to get messy. It means taking a look at these very important issues that are impacting the world and saying, what can I do to be an ally? What can I do to use my privilege in a way that affects change? And let that be an act of magic. magic isn't always going to the astral. Magic sometimes is sitting here and saying, I'm willing and ready to make change. I'm going to re-examine my ethics, you know, and take a step in the right direction.
The best magic seems to be as well where the best magic is with others, groups of people. You know, the whole point of collective consciousness. Well, if everything's a collective, then surely you need everyone to be together or to be collected for the consciousness to be one. There's this whole thing about the hermits, you know, like going up the mountain and reach enlightenment. And the one I can't say from the yoga point of view, as will know more than me, but I know on the western point, a lot of the hermits sort of go up to the mountain and stay there. In the east, at least in China, is that yes, they go off, they get disillusioned with the world, and they go off to the mountains to meditate. But when they reach enlightenment, and enlightenment is not one step, it's just one step of many, but when they reach enlightenment, they know they have to come back, because it's pointless being enlightened if you do not share it with the world. It's a waste of energy, a waste of chi. So Lao Tzu, Lao Tzu was the guy or guys who wrote the Tao Te Ching. Now, what most people don't get is that he went off. Before he went off, he wrote the Tao Te Ching, but he came back and he wrote other books of what he learnt up in the mountains, what he learnt by blending that more information. So, yeah, you know, the best magic is with other people, is shared with other people. It's the interaction. Well, that's my point of view.
It allows us to, but it's also a good metaphor for a lot of the things we're seeing in spiritual communities now. You know, and I'm not against people taking altering substances to reach different phases of enlightenment, but that's a good metaphor. We have to come back and do something with the information we're getting. You can't just go into transcendence and not come back and change the world. Otherwise, it's wasted. Even Ram Dass, who pioneered the use of LSD in spirituality with Timothy Leary, you know, says we have to come back and do something with it, or it's wasted. So much like our, you know, and that's one example, but very simply even, magic is that interacting with the world. Magic is not being afraid to speak your voice. Magic is doing what is right, even if you may be the only one doing it. Magic is love, and loving those people who may not love you back. Magic is all of those things and so much more. And, you know, I think sometimes we get caught up in the phenomena, because it's easy to get caught in the phenomena. It's easy to do the manifesting work. It's easy to do the work of transcendence. But in my tradition, we teach transcendence as descending. This is where we are. And it's beautiful to go up into the mountains and to go up into the mountains of our own consciousness, but that's not where we live. We live here. And this is such a sacred place to be, but we spend so much time trying to get out of here, you know, that we forget how sacred it is. We forget how sacred it is to be in this body. And we're only in it for that much time, right? In relation to like the existence of the world. And that such is something we have to be in gratitude for, because we don't get another chance in this body, right? We don't get another chance to do this right here, right now. Like, we're here now for a reason. And in order to transcend, we have to come into the body in a way that says, I love you, first to myself and then to those around me. But we don't get to do that if we are always distracting ourselves with the phenomena.
You know what?
And phenomena's great.
There's a great story that I heard from my Qigong teacher, and it was about a woman who was doing a certain form of Qigong where you stand on your toes and you hold your arms, having to hold the ball of Qi. And while she was doing that, she was doing it in a park in China, and the story goes, and while she was doing that, Buddha appeared to her in the clouds. Well, every day after that, she went to the same park, the same place, same pose. I see you nodding, trying to get Buddha to come back, and Buddha never came back.
Right.
And that ultimately is the failure. There's a story about in the Joseph Campbell book I just read. I think it's an Indian story about how one of their sacred people had destroyed some demon. He was thinking very highly of himself. And basically, to sum the story up, a parade of ants goes marching across the floor. And the story is those are all people who had your job, who thought that they were doing an awfully good job at their spirituality, and presto,
Right.
they're ants. You know,
Exactly.
to go back to that place of you know, like, thinking that you're all that in a bag of chips because there is the magic in your life, because there's the great manifestation, and then you become, you know, elitism. I see it everywhere. It just has different manifestations. I see it in myself. You know, I'm not immune to it by any means. Whether that's like a small manifestation of it, like I think that certain kinds of dogs are better than certain kinds of cats, or vice versa. You know, that's elitism. It's a really small example of it, but it's still a form of elitism that's manifesting to, you know, like the really in pain human being where they think one race is superior to another or inferior to another. So I really think that to touch basically, I wanted to touch on what you were saying earlier, which is, you know, in a spiritual community and like the hippie alternative free love community, I really appreciate what you say, because I've seen that for quite some time of this, like, we're all humans, we all have the same problems, but we're like, our community is notorious for going around and judging non-spiritual people and condemning them for not being spiritual and excluding them for not being spiritual and not being open to them. You know, like you'll see a group of alternative people walking down the street who are snubbing people who are normal looking because the normal looking person is snubbing them. I smile at those people. I say good morning. They don't know what to say. They're forced to respond. They're forced to have an open, like, kind of intimate interaction for a second. Because I don't want there to be that separation, like you were talking about, the separation from the whole of this person who's like, you know, got some pretty stinking thinking going on is me. They're just a me that's in a different form of pain and with a different program than me. So to push them away because of that as a form of consciousness. I mean, because we end up pushing people away from us like that as a form of pain. You know, I get in such a state of pain that I can't handle other people's pain, and so I push them away with suboptimal tactics sometimes because I need to defend myself because I'm in so much pain. But if you're not in pain, I mean, it boils down to elitism. It boils down to separation, which is ultimately what we're trying to, as a community, what we're trying to undo. But I think it's called boomeritis in some circles, where the enlightened ego. You know, I've got this figured out. I know what I'm doing. I've got this. You know, not so when you think you've conquered the monkey. You know, it is when you really start slipping. When you think that it's not just a continuous every moment checking in with yourself. You know, you start to slip, and then it turns into just another set of dogmas, maybe healthier dogmas, maybe more advanced dogmas that do more good for the world than these other ones do. But ultimately, it's not the whole. It's not the totality. So that's my 2 cents. So I really appreciate what you said. All that to say, and I totally agree.
Absolutely. And I think that's the work, though, is we have to take those honest looks at ourselves. We can't really call ourselves community if we're excluding others. And you really can't use the word oneness if you're excluding others.
Yeah.
You can't use like that whole love and light philosophy if your love and light is holding others apart from yourself. It's called spiritual practice for a reason. We're practicing for the times we're living in now. You know, and people always tell me, like, this is my spiritual practice, and I'll always ask them, what are you practicing for? You know, and we're living in a time where it's time to go from practice to action. It's time to put tire to pavement, to not have these conversations in our communities. It's acknowledging that we're holding ourselves apart. You know, it's not looking at, you know, what we can do to create an inclusive space, you know, and I think it's important because to not look at that, you know, we may be excluding people, unconsciously excluding people.
Absolutely.
When we start looking, not, you know, especially those of us who are in leadership of community, we really have to do the self-work, because the community is usually based on where the leader is. So to do that self-work is important. It gets into engaging the shadow in a way that says, you know, I'm going to take a look at my complexes. I'm going to take a look at those parts of myself that are fractured, those parts of myself that are racist, those parts of myself that are sexist, those parts of myself that are whatever. And I'm going to do some work around that.
Yeah,
and I'm going to acknowledge it.
That are afraid. Like all of
Yeah.
this, that's what it really comes down to. You manifest this outward persona of whatever that judgment is because you're insecure. You're feeling it.
Yeah. And a lot of it, you know, it's indoctrinated. You know, we grow up in communities. We're not, we don't live in bubbles, you know? And sometimes this stuff comes in very subtly, you know? Like, for instance, you know, when I was having a conversation one time about paganism with someone, and they were like, oh, well, like, witches eat babies and stuff, you know? And it was like, you know, it seemed to them like it was funny, but it's a microaggression.
Right.
You know, it comes out of this deeper fear, and they're making what they're perceiving to be a joke, but it's a joke about someone's religion and faith, you know? So this microaggression comes out. And at that moment, it's important for us to speak up and say, well, that's not what it is. You know, and we have to call each other out in ways that are constructive. I think sometimes the on the other side of the coin is we really start picking people apart for their transgressions in a way that creates even more tension. I think we as activists have to listen, and those who we are asking to change also need to be willing to listen, because without the listening piece, everyone's just talking around and over and sideways, and like nothing gets done. This is why we've been having the same conversations for so long, because the willingness to listen is also magic. I think sometimes the willingness to say, okay, I'm going to listen, and I'm really going to hear what you're saying. I'm going to be present enough with you to empathize with you, to understand where you're coming from, so that we can have constructive, creative dialogue around what is happening here.
That opens a magic space when you do that.
It really does.
That actually opens. I just did this like a couple weeks ago. I do power washing as my day slave job, and I was working around. I work in a small town that's full of very, very expensive homes and some very rich people. And I was power washing, and I got somebody's lawn furniture wet, and the guy is irately yelling at me about how he's going to sue me for getting his stuff wet. And I was present with him, and I empathized with him, and I held that space for him, tried to find out what his need was, tried to empathize with him to say back to me what he was telling to me. At the end of 10 minutes, he was laughing with me. And he's not the kind of guy who likes the way I look, I'm sure. You know, he's not that kind of fellow who's an open kind of fellow. He was obviously in a lot of pain and had some very negative experiences with that sort of thing in the past. But because I was able to hold that space for him, it made a magic change in him that I wouldn't have been able to facilitate any other way. Because if I had been getting caught up in my fear and my reaction, then I wouldn't have been able to hold that sacred space for him, which gave him the ability to feel safe in a situation that he felt so unsafe in, that he was taking it to, like, I mean, because to me, if you threaten to sue somebody, that's the equivalent of like a modern day throwing a punch. Like you're winding up to throw a punch if you're threatening to sue someone. So he was in so much pain that he was winding up to throw the punch, but because of the empathy, because of the magic of holding that space for a being in pain, it allowed him to calm down, to feel safe, feel secure enough to let his guard down again and to reconnect on that heart level.
Right. I think what you said there, Ethan, that's really important, is that you allowed him to have space for his anger. You know, and I think that's the missing piece, and that's why phrases like "all lives matter" don't work, because when you start saying "all lives matter," you're saying it from over here, and you're trying to deny others the necessary anger that they're experiencing. In whatever movement it is that they're in. It's important to let them have that space, because it's not my space to take away.
It's never like saying to somebody in that moment, "Oh, calm down." Yeah,
Right.
that's fire.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
rather than like holding that space. Look, guy, how can I help you? I'm sorry. What would you like me to do? What?
Yeah,
do
that's what I did.
offering the branch.
What can I do to make this better? Can I come clean this up? What can I do? Please tell me. Can I do this? Can I do this? Can I, what do I need to do to make this situation better? And that's what it takes.
Or even better, what I usually recommend is not even saying that. Like sometimes just saying, I don't know what is going to make this better, but I'm here with you and I see you and I hear you. And
Absolutely.
I'm going to sit here and see you and hear you until something comes up that we can do together, even if it's just sitting here and letting you feel what you're feeling and
Absolutely.
understanding that I am here with you in this space of feeling. And I think that's important to do with ourselves. I think, we talk about ahimsa a lot in yoga, and ahimsa is that non-violence, but it requires us to be non-violent with ourselves too, because, we're going to mess up, and to not berate ourselves and to hold ourselves back. And I see that a lot in spiritual communities, because there is like compare and contrast. Oh, well, that person's like leaving the body 5 times a day. That guy must be like the guru status already, and like, oh, that guy is like doing down dog so perfectly, But and we do that a lot. It's just, I think the windows that Facebook and Instagram and these things give us, it feeds that a bit, and I think sometimes it takes us away from the sacredness that is just who you are. You just are who you are. That's why sometimes when people ask me to do bios for shows, I'm like, I don't know. I do so much. I don't know. I don't know. Labels sometimes constrict us.
I want to talk about that more. I want to talk about you are just who you are and the sacredness of life, because you said that so perfectly, and that you said 2 things that we didn't get to discuss that really excite me. Okay. So there's 2 things. 2 words, 1 word. One of them is about leaving the body and going up and up and up and out, and all of the Eastern about transcendence. So important to just go up and up and out. And the shamanic perspective, and you said that your witchcraft also perspective of going descending is actually where the power is. And Ethan and I have been talking about that. We've been and we've been just also talking about. I've been learning more in my life about you're talking about working with the parts of yourself, and then loving all of those different parts of yourself that come up, and giving that critical part of yourself self-love, or seeing what all that is. So the dirty work with the hands on the soil and all of that, the juice of all of that. So those 2 things, and then there was one more thing. I guess we can start with that, but then the sacredness of just being in a body. Yeah. That gave me so much joy just to remember, because
How
right.
holy is that? How holy is it to be in your own body? I mean, it's the most beautiful thing. There are 3. I heard this shaman one time. He said there are 3 mysteries we'll experience in life. 3 very transcendent, very powerful things: birth, sex, and death. Mm-hmm. Because they're mysteries. They really are these processes that happen that we're a part of, but we're that are so much beyond us that we can't even really wrap words around. Like with death, we try to wrap. We have theories about what happens. We have ideas. We have maybes. But the most beautiful mantra for that one is, I don't know. I think it needs to be a mystery. And I love that it's a mystery, that one day we'll all get to experience that mystery in whatever way we're going to experience it. And it's going to be beautiful. Just like living in this body every day is a mystery. It's going to be beautiful. There's going to be some days where you don't even want to get out of the bed. There's going to be some days when you just can't wait to put your feet on the earth. And I think all of that is sacred. I think all of it is important to acknowledge as sacred. It's like getting on my yoga mat and then noticing my hamstrings are just too tight today, and loving the fact that I get to have that moment of tightness with my hamstring. It's knowing that my heart's going to break, and loving it even in the breaking, and being okay with experiencing all the multitude of emotions that allow us to be fully human. And when people tell me, oh, I've transcended the ego, I don't feel emotion, I don't feel this, I feel sad for them. You know, I do. It's like, ah, life happens at the edges. Life happens when you're crying too. Life happens when you get so angry, like your whole system freaks out, you know. It's like all of that is, yeah, all of it's sacred. Like all of that's holy. It's like you can't say that, you know. It's like we have a saying in our tradition, God is self, self is God, and God is a person like myself. You know, and it really speaks to this unity that we have. We are divine in our own nature. We are that divine expression of love living itself in this environment. And it's not to say that things are going to be easy, because love isn't easy. It's not supposed to be easy. It's like when people tell me, they come to me for readings, like, Michael, when am I with my soulmate? I'm like, don't ask for the soulmate, because the soulmate's going to be the most difficult relationship you'll ever be in, because
oh my God, I just got out of an 8-year relationship with my soulmate and it kicked my ass.
Soulmates do that. That's what they're there for.
Yeah.
You know? But it's like I met my soulmate. You know, I have his name tattooed on my arm. It was sacred. He was my most powerful teacher, but it was also the most difficult experience of my entire life. But had it not been for that, there's things I wouldn't have found out about myself, you know. And when I look at those meetings, they're very magical.
I was just going to say, there's an old Dara saying that the greatest seafoods will be the one closest to you. So, you know, meaning, you know, either, you know, could be parents or loved ones, or the ones closest to you. But then the ones closest, the most meaningful seafoods also bring the biggest and hardest lessons. So, yeah, there's a lot to learn from there.
It's like God is in all those details, you know. It's like God herself walks through everything that we do, the tears, the pain, the joys, the light, the dark, all of it. It's all sacred. And we have to look at those pieces honestly and with courage, because it requires us to be vulnerable. I find if a spirituality, you know, doesn't encourage some vulnerability, it's missing that piece. And it requires us to say, you know, like my favorite mantra is, I don't know. I don't know. You don't have to know all the answers. Like that's the beauty, is sometimes it's figuring it out. Like that is the journey. The road is the destination. Where are we going? We're right here. It's like,
I feel that way right now. I'm like, what am I doing? Where am I going?
What am I doing? I'm right where I'm supposed to be in my not knowingness.
Yeah, that's
because
hard for me.
it's hard because the human part of us so like in our tradition, the soul is divided into 3 parts. There's our rational part. It's the part that processes like numbers. There's the God self, the part that's holy and divine, the highest, most perfect part of us. And then there's the animal self, the lower self. It's the part of us that's primal, that holds our memories. It's the part that, you know, runs the body. And the work is aligning those 3 parts in a way that lets us step into power and step into full consciousness. In a way that is self-possessed, that lets us move to the world aligned and holy. But in order to get those parts working together and firing up together, we have to do that introspection that allows us to say, man, I'm still holding grief. There's that anger. There's that work around forgiveness. There are those pieces that still need my awareness. There's my addiction. There's my shame. It's inviting all of those to that table and saying, I see you, and I'm willing now to actually dialogue and honor you as part of my path, and to no longer hold you apart from me in a way that lets me be victim. It's saying, you are holy because you struggled. It's lighting a candle to your pain and saying, I honor you as part of my path. It's getting to a point where, like, I found for me the hardest part was lighting a candle to those pieces that were broken, to those people that helped break the pieces, and saying, I honor you as teacher, and thank you for helping me to break. You know, and that's the heavier, deeper work of shadow work. But it's important for us to do that work because it lets us acknowledge the parts that are resisting stepping into divinity.
Exactly. Yeah.
It keeps, those parts keep us from the holiness of life.
Yeah.
Well, that's what made a shaman, was a shaman would experience a lot of abnormal experiences during their childhood, like sickness or a lot of problems just growing up and being able to handle things that would put them apart from the rest of their culture. And that was the point, because they were the holy people, so they needed to have an outside perspective. They needed to have a different perspective than the whole to be able to reflect back to that and help facilitate the healing. You know, it's like that Einstein saying, if you can't use the I think you can't use the same thinking that you got basically that you got yourself into the problem with, basically.
Yeah. And find the solution with the same thinking that got the problem.
Yeah, that's the one. Steve, more eloquent than me, but at the end of the day. So, you know, I mean, that's kind of the thing, is like we have to be broken. Because if we're not broken, then we're going to be the same as everybody else. And I talk about this a lot, and I'm sure some people are sick of hearing this by now, but I'm going to say it again: the totality thing of truth. You know, when you've been broken, you can experience the truth of what it's like to be. Like for me, I'll take myself as an example. I was an extremely angry child, like extremely angry, overly volubly angry. So I have the experience of hurting people with my anger physically as a child, and that experience, while like extremely hurtful to me on some levels, and I'm very sad about the pain that I was in and the deeds that it led me to do. I have so much more empathy for people who find themselves in a situation where they have lashed out in pain in a physical way. For me to interact with other people's anger and have more compassion for that, because I've experienced the totality of that. Because I've experienced the truth of, wow, I really didn't want to do that. And then I've been on the receiving end. So I'm being like, wow, that really sucks when it's done to me. So I've experienced the totality. And I know that you know this because you met your soulmate. You have this with my soulmate. There's this mirror relationship where I would do something to her. 6 months, a year later, she would do the same stimulus to me. And I would experience the truth and totality of that experience. And it would cause so much growth, so much painful growth. You know, I don't think that growth is supposed to be not painful. It's supposed to be painful. I'm sure a chick is freaking out when it's trying to get out of that egg. You know, it doesn't want to stay in there no more. I'm sure that the seed splitting open is not having a joyful experience at that time when its shell cracks open.
But you know, I challenge that, because what I've been learning this year, it hasn't. I'm in a very vulnerable. I'm sure you guys can feel space at this moment energetically, but I have prayed for, and I have been, how do I say this from my soul? I have a belief that that splitting open can be orgasmic, that there is a state of like tantric aliveness that we can walk in, where we can, in the flow, like we were talking about the flow state, like there is a way of being in this world that is ecstatic. And I know that that's possible. I just know
I definitely believe it can be attained. I think that sometimes we probably have to vacillate between the two to truly keep the totality.
You live between the two, and but and it's funny because I was just astrology. I was just listening to an astrology thing about you know, the unresolved grief. There's your unresolved grief. There's your this. There's your that. You know, you're going into it, etc. I lost my thought with that, but what's that?
It'll come back.
It'll come back. It'll come back. But
They always do.
something about being in the high. I don't know, the opposite of that. Instead of like always having to go, oh, it's the future. That's what it was. Yeah, I came back. Instead of having to deal with the past and come up with stuff and bring all that stuff up, all your like medicine in a way to make you the shaman that you are, etc. Which is like I'm totally living at this moment. And making you different from the world in the journey. But instead of that, like, why don't we just like release our identification with our bullshit stories and
absolutely.
just let that go and like let that be not us. And
yeah,
go
that's
forward.
the higher state that we're all. I feel that we're all going for is ultimately to be able to that duality of the yin and the yang of knowing your past but not identifying with your past. Like people, Michelle, I know I've talked to you about this. Like people ask me about my history. I can't tell you my history in like one long go, because I don't think like that. To me, those are things that happened in the past, and I'm moving on to the future. So I forget things that I can do. I forget things that are a part of me, because that's not what I'm focusing on, and that's what I try to not focus on, and I still focus on it sometimes. So
one of the things that comes up from what you said, is important that we don't. We can't really let things go. It's especially when something like this, when it's heavier, when it's something that's part of our identity. It's like the fact that I went through addiction. I can't let that go, but I can integrate it, and that's the work. You know, so when people say, I just want to let this go, or I want it to just be orgasmic, it's yes, we can get to orgasm, but we have to fumble through sex first. Right? And it's honest, right? It's honest. We got to fumble through the sex first. You know?
It's the duality of the experience through the pleasure through the pain and all that.
But it requires us to like own the fumbling. It's knowing that we're going to fumble and we're going to mess this thing up. Like that's what we're sent here to do. I think more often than be perfect, is we're sent here to really just mess it up.
Michael, my inner child's like hugging you around the neck right now.
Because it's honest, you know.
It's hard, but it's hard
I hear, yeah.
do that, you know.
I hear so many of my clients are always saying, if I can just let this go, and I say, well, if you let that go, you wouldn't be who you are right now. It's like you can't let it go, but what I can do is look at it lovingly and say, I hold honor around that part of my past, and I love that part of my path enough to bring it back in. We forget the word remember.
Oh my God, that's been like everywhere around me lately.
Myself, right? So we're recollecting those pieces, and that's why they come up in our consciousness so much. It's like the body saying, remember, the body, the holder of memory. It says, hey, remember that time when this happened? The heart has its own like neurobiology. You know, the heart remembers. It knows. It's like the very fact that going through a heartache can kill you. Like there's broken heart syndrome, where the heart can actually stop working because of a heartache. So the body remembers. It knows. It stores this stuff. So when those thoughts and memories come up, that's when we can take that into action. I can take that to my yoga mat. I can take that to a candle and do some candle work. I can take it to my journal or into a meditation, or I can simply say, oh my God, thank you. I love you. I appreciate you. Because, you know, in truth, no matter what I went through, if I'm still breathing, right, that's holy. I can put it on my altar. I view the altar of the body as the heart, you know, and the soul is constantly placing things on that altar. It's placing not only the gorgeous, but the gory. It's not only placing the beautiful, but the profane. You know, it's placing all of that on our altar, and we're going to experience all of it while we're here. So this is when people say they want to transcend into oneness, or they want to like go into the stars and into the skies. I'm like, man, I just want to be right here. God, how this is like the holiest place we can be. How powerfully sacred this all is, you know? So my desire is to be more fully here.
What's that, Bobby?
Here.
There's a great saying, a friend of mine, one day Taoist, Stephen Russell, his nickname is the Barefoot Doctor, and he says, like the great special saying of, your body is a temple, but don't forget to let it be a nightclub every once in a while.
Nice.
You know, you're meant to get messy. You know, my name, Boggy. Boggy means the balance between chaos and calmness. I've said it a million times, but you're meant to go a little bit mental every now and again. You know, you see animals, they're nice and calm, and then they're running around the walls and the curtains and everywhere else. You're allowed to get a bit messy. You're allowed to... There's another Taoist saying, when emotions overwhelm you, sadness, anger, whatever it is, work them out, find the balance. Scream, shout, jump up and down, have a temper tantrum, do what you've got to do to get them out, because if you store them in, Emotions equal stress, stress equals tension, tension equals illness, illness eventually equals death. So don't worry, or you know, don't build that anger up, don't build that stress up, because it will kill you. And the whole point is live in the now, live in this moment. So yeah, you're allowed to be in a nightclub, you're allowed to get a bit messy, you're allowed to have fun, you're allowed to make mistakes, because that's the whole blooming point. But hey,
I really like. There's a Joseph Campbell quote. See if I can muck it up. Something to the effect of, "I don't believe in heaven is about us." I'm going to paraphrase it because basically it's to the point of, I don't believe that we're going to be able to do anything in heaven besides stare at God and be in the awesomeness of God and how awesome God is. So we're here now, so we can fuck around and have a good time. It's all paraphrasing, of course, because that's what we're here to do. We're here to experience the holiness of sex. We're here to experience the holiness of how much it hurts to fall on your face, physically and emotionally, and how empowering it is to get back up again after that failure. Like, I'm autistic and dyslexic. I had to overcome a bunch of stuff. I couldn't talk right, 2 years of speech pathology, all that sort of stuff. There's a sense of fortitude that I have because of it that I wouldn't have any other way, and the only reason I have that is because I couldn't talk right. I wet my bed till I was 8 or 9. I had all of these social emotional problems growing up and being able to relate to people and understand people. So it gives you that knowledge of that totality of the you know, because without the sweet you can't have the sour, without the yin you can't have the yang. So my victories are sweeter because I have fallen down on my face so many times. My understanding is greater because of the pain that I've suffered. You know, that's why the pain teacher is present in our bodies. The pain teacher never shows up unless it's there to teach you something. The pain teacher always has a message for you. Whether we can interpret the message or not, and how we choose to listen to the message, whether we choose to drug it, try whatever your method of dealing with it is, whether that's Western or Eastern or however, it's there. You got to acknowledge it, because if not, it's going to keep poking at you until you listen. So if it wasn't supposed to be there, then the universe wouldn't have made it that way. If it wasn't supposed to suck so much, it wouldn't suck so much. You know, that's my perspective. Because so far, I haven't found anything that God messed up on. You know, you look around at nature, and God did a pretty good job planning that thing out. Like, it works pretty well together, continues to function no matter kind of what you do to it on a certain level. It seems like it's got a pretty good plan. So to me, the agony is just that part of the experience. And I think that on a certain level, as we've become more advanced, we've forgotten that agony of life. You know, in a hunter-gatherer culture, you're constantly reminded of the agony of the struggle of existence because you're seeing it in your loved ones and you're seeing it in the environment around you, and you're so intricately connected to that environment that you cannot deny the brutality of life, of the killing and the harvesting and the struggle to survive. But because of that, you had a more beautiful totality of the relationship with nature, where it was like native cultures thought of animals as a thou instead of an it. When something is a thou, it has a personality and it has a oneness and a being to it, but an it is an object. So we talk about animals as its. We talk about plants as its instead of thou. So ultimately, all this to say that suffering and pain and pleasure are also so linked together on a base of consciousness that I just can't see one without the other. I just don't see how we would be able to see that. I don't see how we would be able to see the happiness without the sorrow. Because
we're born into separation.
Yeah, exactly. The more tortured they are, you know, you look at artists, the great artists, all really fucked up people. You know, because they had that experience that changed them forever, that molded them, and as a result, you know, look at a diamond. Great example. A diamond is a piece of coal that survived pressure extremely well. It handled that shit real well for a long time, and look what it became. You know, and look what you can do to it, and then you can facet it with memories. You can facet a diamond. You know, a faceted stone is one of my favorite metaphors for life and experiences, because each experience grinds away a part of your stone. until one day you are a stone that is covered with 1,000 little facets. And then you try and find other stones that have facets that connect well with yours, that are similarly shaped, similarly ground. Different people are made of different stones, so therefore the same situation affects everyone differently. Some people are softer stones, so they get much more worn down by a situation. Some people are harder stones, so they are much more emotionally and physically capable of having the fortitude to withstand those situations. And I totally forgot where I was going with this, so I should probably stop.
You know, I think it's all part of the process. You know, we're born into separation, and part of the journey here is finding our way back to the divine, which is why I think topics like death are so important to talk about, because we are very death phobic. We want to live forever. People want to prolong life to the point where we create these very mystical places we go to after, you know. But the problem is we sometimes view death as punishment. We view death as this very bad thing, you know, when death isn't a bad thing. There are bad things that cause death, but death itself isn't a bad thing. And we've been faced with so much death over the past, you know, year, because we're much more. It's much more thrown at us than it ever has been. But it's important to talk about it, because when death happens, grief happens. We're not allowed to grieve. We're taught to move on to the next thing, or we politicize death, and we're not allowed to grieve. Or even within our interpersonal connections, we're taught to move on, to get over it, to X, Y, and Z it away. When we need to, yeah, be a man, you know, or man up. You hear these phrases, you know, or even with women, you know, now to show grief and to show that is to show weakness, you know. So we're taught that to grieve is weakness, but I think it's the most courageous thing we can do. But also to honor the fact that one day we're going to die, I think makes things much more sacred. To know that a relationship's going to end one day means you shouldn't take any of those moments for granted. You know, we think relationships are going to last forever, you know, but they're not. Someone's going to die eventually, you know, or something's going to happen, and it's all part of the dance. It's the agreement we come into. By coming into life, we agree to die. There's this great movie called Grief Walker, and in the movie, the guy says, you know, one of the struggles, he's a shaman, one of the struggles he had to come into dealing with was by bringing his children into the world, he birthed them so that they could die. You know, and that's really the truth. We come into life so that we can die. But in that process of going from life to death, all this sacred stuff happens along the way. But knowing that one day we're gonna exit, that we're only temporarily here, allows us to come into deeper contact with those things, even the heavier, harder stuff, because it means that, God, even this is sacred. There'll be one day where I won't ever have this experience again, so I need to take a look at it in a way that lets me integrate it and embody it, so that it's not something that's apart from myself. It's something that is also holy, that is also sacred. And I think, you know, when we start having those discussions with ourselves, we don't view death as this very scary thing. I often will tell people from my own like, the idea of dying is scary, because we don't know how that'll happen. But death itself isn't scary, because so many people have done it before me. Like, the body knows exactly how to do it. The body knows how to die. Just like it knows how to go through each and every part of your day. It knows how to form itself in the womb. The body is so intelligent. Like, when it comes time, you just give over control to the body, and it will take you the way it's supposed to take you. But, you know, denying the fact that we're going to die. And I see it a lot in spiritual communities. We do what I call a spiritual bypassing. Oh, yes, but we'll live forever. Or, no, we don't. You know, maybe there are parts of us that will transcend and move into higher consciousness and whatever. But it's removing the holy from the very fact that this body will die. This body is going to die. I think like temples fall, they crumble. You know, they're meant to, so that the cycle of life continues. Like, Mary Oliver said it really great, a really great poet. She said it in an interview recently I listened to. She said, you know, she doesn't know what happens when the soul leaves the body, but what she does know is that this body will decay and it will turn to dust and the bones will crumble and those will return to the earth, and that itself is holy enough for her. Anything beyond that is icing on the cake, right? But the very fact that this body is just it's going to go through these beautiful processes. When my aunt was dying of cancer, they handed us a sheet of paper, and on that sheet were 10 things that were going to happen, 10 processes her body was going to go through as she died. And I was like, wow, we know. The body knows how to do it. We don't even have to worry about dying. The body just knows. You know, it knows how. Might not know when, and some people do, but, you know, I think it makes it all so much more sacred when we know we don't have unlimited time here. It makes those days you're like, God, it's so hot outside, right? It's like, God, it's so hot. Let me enjoy the heat because this may be the last moment I ever get to enjoy the heat, right? It makes those things that we get angry about sacred, right? Like one day my little dog was like bothering me, you know, I was like, oh, stop it, you know, I was like, one day she's not going to be there to bother me. Like one day, like I won't have that interruption. I won't have that. It'll just be gone. So I need to like acknowledge and enjoy her presence. You know,
one of the great gifts.
Even the frustrating moments. You know, but it lets us take those things we were talking about earlier, Michelle, like those very difficult parts of our lives, and say, God, you know, in the totality of my entire 38 years here on Earth, that 3 or 4 years that shit was hitting the fan. That in comparison, and then even that in comparison to like my time here on Earth.
Can I ask you, was your 3 or 4 years around your Saturn return?
God, I've had so many. Like I don't really follow astrology. Like once math comes in, like I just
like when you were like 28 to 32 or 30 to 35 or
I've had many of those. I don't know, like I think for me around those times, yeah, because I had like an astrologer one time tell me, oh man, Saturn return is coming. I'm like, cool. But for me it's like I find like sometimes for me my soul just goes through its own set of cycles. Like I can go back and like I can see where something came in and manipulated situations so that I would end up exactly where I am, exactly this moment, having this discussion with all of you, because
I love that practice.
Because it's like, you know, I wouldn't have made these decisions consciously, you know, but we're here we are, and I think, you know, I look back and I think about what would have happened had I gone this way. It would have opened up a whole nother set of doors, but it wouldn't be the ones that led me here. So very specific reasons that we go through struggle and joy, that we go through orgasm and dysfunction. You know, it's like, it's the reasons why we have awkward sex.
Yes.
You know, and then we have really great sex. There are reasons why we go through the awkward and through the great. But it all comes back to this whole thing is an act of love. It's like the greatest act of love the universe gives us is giving us the chance to be here, you know, for the time that we're here, to do with this life whatever we can.
You know, Phoenix is passing. That's one of the things that it showed. Like, cause I held back from him in different ways. My relationship with him was so vibrant and intense and amazing, and he loved me so much, incredible, that I wasn't used to it. Yeah. And
he was God, he was like a rock star, you know, and I could see it. I could see when he and I first met, when he and I first came together. I was going to a conference in Atlanta, and he hadn't even stepped on to the spiritual path yet. Like, we were having this discussion in this coffee shop about what it might look like in the future, right? And we both kind of ended up where that discussion said. You know, so 2 parts of the story I think that are important for us to acknowledge is that I think when we own our authenticity, magic can happen. Like we can put ourselves out there so completely and so fully that magic happens. And we can affect and inspire so many people. But at the same time, I think in creating those identities, we can lose a little bit of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
and I found that in him, like, you know, God, he was just always everywhere. You know, and there's one point I asked him, hey, like, when are you gonna slow down a little bit? Like, take care of, like, gotta take care of the vessel. You know, you're gonna take care of the part. And I think we get so caught up sometimes in getting the message out there, and maybe it's because we know we don't have that much time. You
That's
know,
for sure.
I feel there's a part of him who knew, like, when he and I first had our conversations, and there's parts of the story that I can't share, but I do know that he knew that his time wasn't infinite.
Yeah.
You know, I knew that he knew that he had a certain amount of time, which is sometimes why we end up pushing ourselves so hard. But, you know, he was definitely a soul brother of mine, definitely an inspiration. I have him, like, on my Facebook and on my phone. You know, he's always, like, one of my spirit guides. But I think the message I always give for him now is, like, don't burn yourself out. You don't have to know all the answers. You know?
Really? That's a beautiful message that you get from him. That's awesome.
A message I always give for him, because there's times I'm like, I gotta put this stuff out in the world. I gotta do this. He's like, just own it. You don't have to put that out into the world. Sometimes what you get is just for you.
Dude, yeah, that's a hard, yeah, I think, I can't remember the instance, but that happened to me the other day where I did, I put something on Facebook and I was like, nobody's going to understand that at all, because it was, but it was gorgeous and a synchronicity and divine, and it was medicine, it was so pure, but it was mine, and it's hard to not instantly as a teacher want to, like, regurgitate, spit it into the baby's mouth like baby birds, blah, 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 but, like, nobody can hear you because it's mysticism that's, like, it's in your language only, you know?
Yeah, Eckhart Tolle says it well, and I've kind of made this, like, my business model now, is he says, the purpose of a spiritual teacher is to remind you of who you are and to point you in the direction of home.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm finding, like, I've gone from the label spiritual teacher to spiritual mentor. Like, I'm not here to teach you anything that you don't already know. I'm just here to remind you things you have forgotten.
Yeah.
And in that remembering, it's my hope that you'll grow, or that you'll give yourself the opportunity to accept the invitation that life is always offering us, even through the struggle, or through those joyful, beautiful, bright moments that we'll experience as we walk down this road. And we just have to keep coming back to that, defining what love is for ourselves, because it's going to be different. I had this experience once where I was dating this guy, my soulmate. One of the few times we broke up, he turned to me one day and he goes, you know, when you say I love you, it means something completely different than when I say it. And it was like one of my first powerful teachings. I was like, wow, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Because, well, my perspectives on love are completely different. So when I say it, this is what it means. But when you say it, I can feel it means something completely different. You know, and I think that's one of the things we forget is, you know, we each have to define these things. But what I often will do in relationships, even now, is I'll sit down with someone and if the word love comes up, I ask them to define it. What does that mean when you say that? What does that mean? What does intimacy mean to you?
Yeah.
Right? Because if your definition is different than mine, we may clash. You know, we may be spending the rest of the relationship chasing different ideas of love. But if I know what your definition is and you know what mine is, we can work to come into deeper connection.
But it changes. It depends on.
That's supposed to change. I think, you know, it's not supposed to be solid definition. It's dynamic. But this is why we have to keep talking and saying, look, my definition of love is changing. You know, it's like if it changes, if it doesn't change, then we're not doing it right. Which is why sometimes relationships, people stay together well beyond their expiration date. You know, our purpose has been served.
Yeah.
You know, you can't expect the spoiled milk to turn into icing.
Turn into icing.
It's just not going to do it.
Word. Oh my goodness.
Maybe if you plead with it really hard.
Which is what we do. Like, oh, but please, we can work this out.
Oh yeah.
We can make this happen. We can make, you know, and we plead and we beg, and then the gods are saying, man, that ended like 4 years ago. You know, which is why when it finally ends, it's like you're like when my last big relationship ended, it was a big relief. It was like, you know, then all the grief and stuff came up, but it was like it's like the pressure valve was finally relieved for both of us. A deep healing happened in the ending, because we were doing CPR on this very dead thing, and if you put potpourri on a turd, it's gonna smell okay for a while, but the turd's eventually gonna like take over the room again.
Pretty smelly.
Yeah, so I think sometimes that we do that. We use our spirituality sometimes to put potpourri on things that just need to be let go of and released in a way that's healing and healthy, so that we can do the deeper work. And it's not letting it go in a way that says, okay, this is over here. It's letting it go in a way that lets me take it back into myself. It's letting that relationship go and saying, okay, now let me process what I know to be true from this ending. It's letting death be part of the relationship, because they don't last forever. It lets them all be sacred also.
Well,
okay. Live every day as if it was your last, whether it is your own or the relationship that you are in. So enjoying every moment.
Or breathe every breath like it's your last.
And that's what I was saying about Phoenix, was that when he died, when I remember to do this with people, I can be more of like I can give more of myself. Because I know that they're not. What is there to be afraid of? And I oscillate like everybody in between this, like where you're fully like present and just like very giving and open, and where you're like really constricted and not doing that with people because of your vulnerability or whatever that is. So when you put the death in the equation, it makes every moment like you want to be there completely for. Yeah, because there's
a time he came to DC and like we didn't connect. My schedule. I let the time lapse. There's a lot of stuff that was happening. I let the time lapse, and that would have been the last time that I've gotten to see him. And I let it lapse, and that came up when he was in the death process. I was like, we can't let moments pass us by. We have to take those opportunities when they're given to us, because tomorrow isn't guaranteed. The next breath isn't guaranteed. Yeah. So when an opportunity arises for us to be of service or to be present or to connect,
we can't hold back.
We need to give it equal value.
Yes. Oh my God, it's so hard for me. That's what I'm processing. It's so true. It's so I think that a pattern in life for all of us is that we do that, and it's to remember like what game are we playing here? How much can we give to our lives? How much can we serve for our lives?
Life reminds us of that. I think I had an experience with death when I was about 12. My dad started to get progressive dementia, and then he died when I was 17. Progressive dementia. So by the end, I'd say for the last 2 years, my dad had been dead. The man who I had known growing up. My parents got divorced when I was 9. The man I had known growing up died, and there was a lot of things that brought up for me, obviously, but one of the really profound things that I saw from that was how death is just an absence. They're just not there anymore, and that time if you know the time is leading up to the absence, that time is much more holy because of it. So then that in me inspired that sense. Like my therapy, one of my therapies that I did for myself when I was 16 or 17 was there was a local market, and I go buy popcorn from one of the vendors, and I go around and give people popcorn as a way to try and counteract the darkness that I was experiencing in my life. I wasn't conscious of it at the time, just looking back on it now. But because of that holiness that death showed me, death will show you the holiness of life in a way that you can't necessarily understand before, and then you experience it again. Like you'll experience it when a pet dies, or when a friend dies, or a loved one dies, or someone passes. Those are the reminders. Life has all sorts of built-in reminders for us. Those are the reminders that life has for us of that, like, hey, this is holy, this is sacred. Pay attention, because look at how short this time is. And I think ultimately, I wanted to touch on this earlier when you were speaking on this, that we're trained to think to live forever. We want to live forever. We have monuments built to living forever. We have museums where we put things from the past that are so outdated, nobody cares about them except that they're from the past.
Mm.
So we're constantly caught in that state of like, we have, you know, roads that we try to keep going forever, and all of these things that are just monuments to our ego, basically wanting to say that we are this thing, we will be this thing, we will stay this thing, and therefore, because we will be this thing forever, we are safe. And ultimately, there is no constant in the world but change. That is the only constant you can experience. Absolutely, 100% count on every day there will be change. Nothing else is consistent.
So
we're fundamentally, like, our consciousness is fundamentally like trying to go against, you know, egos trying to go against like the baseline of how shit works. So we have all of these great spiritual reminders like death to remind you of the sacredness of life. You have disease to remind you of the sacredness of health. Right. You know, you have pain to remind you of the sacredness of joy and love. So all the messages are built in. You know, like if I would say one thing, sum it up, all the messages are there. We just got to listen for them, because life will teach us how holy life is if we're listening.
Yes, life is totally a ceremony when you speak to you. All right, so guess what, everybody? We have our first listener question that I'm going to read.
Oh my goodness!
So Michael, it's so cool too that we have this, because I would love to do more of this on shows. So I'll do my best to read it. I haven't pre-read it, so bear with us. But so this is from Michael. He can read along with me. Michael, I've been listening through YouTube, and thank you for this discussion. I'd like you to take any questions. Do you have any suggestions? Oh wait, no. Are you guys still there? Okay, good. It froze, yeah. So I was okay. Do you have any suggestions for people who are coming through to a point that they think they might be ready and want to break free and do more, but are still currently dealing with vulnerability, lack of support system, besides what each of our daily lives look like, such as health issues, caregivers, family issues? Oh, so I totally get that. So it's like being a broken healer. Like, I feel like I want to be more of a healing person. I'll let Michael answer it, but I feel like I have issues. So how do I navigate the fear? This is so cool. This is a listener question in the like energetic state I'm in, and I'm reading this. I'm like, oh, good. I'm doing my service work by being. Don't you notice that, guys? As teachers, it's like, or when we do readings, it's like you go through the thing that you're healing for others, and you aren't even aware of it. Whatever. Okay. So how do we navigate? So anyway, so listener, I relate with you. That's all I'm saying. How do I navigate the fear that once you do take the step out, the trolls or the haters, without good direction and support system, could put us back into the hole that we are trying to come out of? Yeah, that's vulnerability. That sums that up. Is there a specific time to know when you are ready for the vulnerability side of this? Suggestions on protection for ourselves during these vulnerable times against others. Michael, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because I was recently psychic attacked after a yoga class. So let's discuss. Ways to respond to those who don't understand, like your newfound freedom, like family members, longtime friends that respond. Longtime friends, that's a huge one. And how to respond from a place of love to those non-supporters with hope to respond to help them grow as well. Apologize if this is confusingly written. Well, with my commentary, hopefully it was all good.
Well, I'm just and it came across here. So.
Lovely. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah. So let's unpack this just a little bit. The suggestion that I have is to just take those first steps, whatever they may be. It's scary. It's not easy. You know, it could be something as simple as, you know, wearing different clothing. You know, it could be eating different food. It could be stepping into whatever you consider to be sacred. And the truth is, we're not doing it for other people. So first remove that from the equation. Because if you are worried about what they will think, you'll never take that first step. Vulnerability is taking the first step for yourself, because of yourself, It's showing up to yourself as holy. It doesn't matter what they think. Now, yes, it's going to be difficult. And you do have to be conscious of your situations, right? Like, for instance, the act of coming out as gay, right, can be very problematic for some people. It could cause them to be kicked out of their homes. It could cause violence. So we want to be conscious of those things when we're taking those steps, whatever that might be, right? So be conscious of your situation. Do it with safety in mind. Do it in a way that will let you be more free, but also a way that lets you be safe. Because I think that's the part of the equation we often forget, is that we want to be safe in making our transitions into the life that we're going to be living. But also to understand that when you step into the role it is you're stepping into, whether it be, you know, like for me, stepping into doing psychic work, or owning the word witch, or becoming vegan, it can be problematic with other people, and you may lose people, and that's part of growth. We go from middle school to high school and we lose 90% of our friends because you changed. Your energetic body has changed. Your relationship to the world around you has changed. And you are not responsible for making them understand who you are on the journey. You're only responsible for knowing yourself. I often get challenged by Christians, because I'm in the South. So I get challenged by Christians a lot. What do you believe? I don't have to argue it, because I'm so sure of myself in my walk with the goddess, or with God, or even with Christ, that I don't need to argue it. So my knowing means I don't have to justify it to anybody. You know, people who I find people have to argue it is because they don't quite know. So they need to have the argument to validate what they don't know, because they got to tell you what they do know about you. So people say, well, why don't you want to talk about it? I'm just so sure that I can be receptive to your perspective if we're going to have an honest dialogue in a way that lets us have mutuality and intersectionality. But if you're going to condemn, there's no point of us having this conversation. You know,
really a conversation then.
It really isn't, and we don't have to validate it to those people. We don't have to. But I do suggest having conversations. Like, paradigm shift gives plenty of space for people to have practice and that are important to them spiritually. You know, Skull Babylon does a really good job of fostering not only honest conversation but debate. And I think, you know, we've had some really great conversations and debates and discussions about a variety of things. Like when I was doing vegan activism for PETA, you know, one of the things we have to practice is the discussions about animal rights, talking about the issues so that you're sure of the issues when you go to talk about them. Confidence, build confidence by having the discussions, journal, talk to people who are teachers. And most teachers, if you have questions, will help you. They will guide you into the conversations. True teachers will challenge your thoughts on the path you're taking in a way that lets you own it more deeply and more fully. You know, I always encourage inquiry. You know, though people usually email me, they'll say, "Oh, Michael, this dream I had, what do you think it means?" And I'll reply. I always reply, "What do you think it means?" And then they give me the reply, and I'm like, "Yeah, that's what I got too." So, you know, I think sometimes having someone mirror back a conversation to you can be important. But don't be afraid to reach out, because there are people who know more about us than we know. The biggest and most powerful mantra is, "I don't know." So, like, say for instance, I'm going into yoga as a new practice, which here in the South can be pretty scary for people. And I don't know anything about it. So maybe let me go ask some people who are taking classes. And let me ask teachers who teach yoga about what it is, you know, so that I can make an informed decision about my journey down the path. Because usually when I hear these types of questions, it's not so much that they're afraid of what others are going to think. It's that we feel we don't know enough to take that first step. Mm-hmm. And you wouldn't have received the insight to move if it wasn't for you to take the first step.
That part about trust is humongous. Like, trusting that, like, if you're being guided to, like, go out and do, and that that by heaven has ordained you to take that, and that you have to believe what they believe about you. I think embodying that has been a big struggle of my own, aligning my animal self, my rational self, and my God self. You know, I see that as all the truth. But go on.
You know, and I think, you know, part of it really is, I mean, the very fact that this person sent in this question means they're vulnerable enough to ask.
Yeah.
You know, so I always appreciate those, you know, to be courageous enough to ask these questions. And then for us to be courageous enough to answer. You know, because I think that's the other side of the equation, is sometimes as teachers, we might not know the answer. And I think having spaces like this where we can dialogue, it's important. I think sometimes too we forget that sacred silence is also important. Like, I don't think necessarily we have to necessarily share our path with everybody. There are parts of my tradition that I will not share because they are to be kept in silence. In silence, stuff gestates, magic grows. There's this old idea where we don't tell people about the spells we're creating because it takes the power away from the spells. You know, we don't have to share every bits and piece, and I don't have to be the official spokesperson for everything in the world. You know, there have been times when I have been the spokesperson, and that's a really big responsibility. But if your goal is to be a teacher, or if that's the path you feel you're on, it is important to educate yourself and to realize there are going to be things that you're not quite sure of, and not to be afraid to ask questions. I think one of the most difficult things to witness is when people don't know and then pretend like they do, and then put out like some very damaging stuff into the world. And I think we have to be able, even as teachers, to say, you know, I don't know. I don't know. You know, so people are so sure about what happens after death. It's like, okay, well, I don't know. I don't know. I haven't been there yet, so I really can't say. And even some people who go and come back, you know, they don't even know. They're like, I have an idea. I saw something, but we didn't stay there, so we really don't know. We know what we know. There are a lot of things we don't know. I think it's okay to say I don't know.
What about psychic protection for people who feel vulnerable to go out and be teachers?
Well, the biggest thing with like psychic protection is to first acknowledge the fact that we need to be protected. But I think too, the fallacy is to think that it requires some very big thing to protect us. Just acknowledging the fact and saying, you know, I walk through the world protected, that can be enough. And one of my traditions, we say a mantra, I am the light is within me, the light moves throughout me, the light surrounds me, the light protects me, I am the light. It could be simply saying, I walk in love and honor with the goddess, and I am always protected as her child. It can be anything, you know. It can be simply saying, the minute I wake up, I am in protection. You know, my soul is so strong that nothing penetrates these gates without my permission. And simply acknowledging the power of my own unified soul is enough. But it requires us to just do some work. You know, I do recommend people doing sacred cleansing of their spaces. Set up a schedule. Like every Friday, I'm going to do a sacred holy bath. Like to put some salt on my head, just clean it all out. You know, every once a month, clean your spaces. Like dust off the altar, cleanse your cards. Take a look at yourself. Like place your hand on your heart and saying, what in me needs cleansing today? It may be going outside and sweating a bit, like detoxifying the body. Maybe I need to look at my diet. Maybe I need to look at my emotions. It may mean cutting toxic people out of our lives. You know, it may be trying something different, because if our old protective system, sometimes the problem is we do the same things over and over again and they become routine, and a prayer that doesn't have power behind it doesn't have power. Exactly. So we may be doing, I am the light, light is within me, and then there's no power in it because it's so routine, right? It's no longer, it's like my ADT system, like my little thing needs the battery changed. You know, I gotta change the batteries. I need to come back into it as something holy and sacred. I need to see the protection around myself.
Passion is power.
Yeah, it's important to look at those things. I think we have to do conscious daily protection work, because the world is shifting and changing and getting more dangerous. You know, energetically, spiritually, even physically in some respects. So we need to take account of how we are moving through the world and how protection manifests for us. But I say keep a journal and take a look. What needs protecting? Like what situations do I need to be more conscious of? Like when I go into new groups here, or I like to check out different churches and things just because I like to just sit in spiritual community. But I always do protection work before I walk in because I don't know those people. They're in a holy place, but not all of them may be holy.
You know what, honey? Yes, you are speaking my language now, because it's the same with yoga studios, you know. And the more expansive my aura has gotten, the more that you need are. It's weird. It's like the more. Oh God, this is gonna sound really crazy. But it's almost like the more powerful you become, the more amplified. The more amplified I'm hearing, the more amplified you are, the more that you have to be conscious and aware of your boundaries energetically, in a way.
Yeah.
The brighter you are, the easier you are seen.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So we have to be conscious of the fact that if we are going to shine, we're going to attract, first, the detractors, and we're going to attract those people who may wish us ill.
Right.
You know, we get the trolls who will show up and, like, you know, I'm a big fan of block and unfriend on Facebook.
Yeah.
You know, they're there for a reason. You know. And I'm okay with telling people in the physical world, like, I can no longer share this space with you because we're no longer in a place of mutuality. And it's okay to close doors. I think we get, especially in spiritual people, like, oh, but my heart, and like, they're such a good friend. Those are all excusing toxicity.
And you can reopen doors when the time is, when the people come back to you, the thing, because I recently did that, where I said that exact thing, where you say, like, you and I are obviously not on the same page anymore, goodbye, and then you get the clue spiritually, next ring of the spiral a few years later, hey, by the way, this was my part that I had in this, and then you get to have an exchange on a whole different level, and that's really interesting.
You know, or not, you know, because I think sometimes, like, there is the feeling like, you know, my whole philosophy on it is there's a reason why doors have peepholes. And I don't have to answer the door when you come knocking again. And I've learned that lesson with relationships. People come knocking again. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on you. Fool me 3 times, like, we're just all screwed.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're just all screwed. Like, we're like, you know, we all take responsibility at that point. You know, but sometimes we need the lesson. There's a part that says, you know what, I need this lesson, you know, for whatever reason, and that's okay too. But I think I've learned now that when sometimes a door closes, we have to let it stay closed. It's like, for instance, with exes, they're your ex for a reason. You don't have to let them back into your life. Even as friends, it's like sometimes friendships have to end, and that's okay too. It's okay to sever ties. I think that's a part of growth. We grow. Like, we don't go back to kindergarten to keep learning the ABCs. Like, we left it. We let it go. We let it stay where it is and took those tools we learned there to continue the journey. But we don't go back and study the ABCs. You know, maybe some people do.
I think it's part of our culture's denial of death.
Right.
You know, we don't want to admit that a relationship is dead because relationships die like everything else does. But since we're afraid of losing something, and that gets into also, since we're such a capitalist society and we're all about resources, friends equal resources too.
Right.
So you've got the duality, you've got the two needs there. You've got, well, I'm afraid of letting anything die, and you've also got, I'm afraid of losing this resource, which are two things that we're all majorly trained in. At least.
Well, it started with, like, MySpace. We started to have our top 8 friends, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
And now we have, like, a number count for how many friends we have or how many likes we receive, and that, you know, there's studies of direct impact on our psyche and how you move in the world. One part of the question I do want to respond to is, you know, how to respond from a place of love, because there will be times when you may have to speak up. You have to say, well, you know, I'm a witch, so get over it. You know, you may have to say, you know, look, I love you, and you don't have to agree with where I'm at on the journey. As the journey is unfolding for me right now, I will love you no matter what. Because sometimes their fear is that if you change, they'll no longer be part of your life. So sometimes they're discontent, or, like, for instance, I use the vegan example. They'll say, well, you know, you not eating meat becomes a challenge for me. That's okay. You know, I am where I am, and you are where you are, and I still love you. and it doesn't mean that you have to change, but my change doesn't mean that I can't still be your friend. You know, and I think sometimes we have to look at what's actually happening there. Is there a fear that's happening? You know, when I stopped drinking and the relationship that I was in, as I had this very spiritual thing happen, and the person I was with, you know, it caused a very visceral reaction in them. They were like, well, you're no fun anymore. You're not that person anymore. It's like, well, yeah, I just had this very spiritual thing happen, you know, and I am no longer that person. But I still love you. But their fear was that they could no longer resonate with me. So I offered an invitation for them to join me on the path, but they chose not to, and that's okay too. You know, I think sometimes there's this lose people like will be less than. You know, and I think sometimes we have to lose people to be more than. You know, and we are going to get people who disagree with us. I get people all the time who come to my page or who email me or, oh, I don't like your tattoos and I don't like this and what you do is stupid and silly and blah, 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 blah. Like, you know, I'll post something, oh, I love bacon, you know, so it's like, you get it, I get it, you know. But what I see when people have those reactions is that they're afraid. The reason they're reacting the way they are is that they're feeling challenged on some level. Like, I'll go to a dinner party and everyone around, I won't even say anything, and everyone around the table would justify why they're eating meat. I didn't say anything, but my presence alone shifted consciousness enough for them to have to validate it to themselves. And then to me, because I was, you know, they immediately made me different than them, you know, but it was their own fear of what they were doing that caused them to have to justify it to me, you know. So just know that sometimes other people's insecurities, it's not even about you, you know. We're really, I mean, we're special, but we're really not all that special when we do this stuff, you know. And sometimes people get in these big ego battles about, you know, why their spirituality is the best, or why their group is the best, or even why their yoga is the best, you know. And it's really not. There's no the best. It just is where you are right now, because tomorrow you may like a completely different road than the one you're on, and you may find a completely different path tomorrow than the one you're on. You know, and you don't have to like share your journey with everybody. Remember, sacred silence is also important. Let what you're doing gestate and grow, and ask. You know, say, I need to share this story, and they'll always show you the right thing.
I think for me, that you sort of said about this. You know, when people have to say, "Oh, you know, my this is better than that," you're on the politics, or you're in the old society of something has to be better than something else. It's like saying, like, you're different. So what? You're different. For me, different's a good thing. Is I want different. I like people around who are different. I like, because, you know, I don't want to eat the same thing the rest of my life. So why would I want the same people, the same style of people, the same energy of people around me? Variety is the key. So, you know, on that state, yeah, I am different, and if you don't like it, then I love you, and if you can't be with me, then fair enough, see you later, bye, love you. But if you can be here, awesome, let's play, let's do stuff. And that's this thing that mine is better than yours, you know, my yoga is better than Tai Chi and Qigong. You hear it a lot. My Tai Chi is better than your Tai Chi because
my Kung Fu.
Is it working? Is it working for you? Is what your style working for you? And if hopefully the answer is yes, then awesome, brilliant. I'm glad it's working for you. I'm so happy. No, honestly, I'm really happy, and I send you love. But there are different styles for a reason. Just like there is more than one flavoured cheese. There is more than one flower in the universe. There is more than one star in the galaxy, because there's variety, and variety is there to explore, to expand, to grow. So it's good there's different styles. A true, obviously for me in the Eastern thing with Taoism, I say from that using this word, Taoist point of view. But for me, Taoism is all about trying different things in different ways. Don't just do one style. do loads of styles. Do as many styles as you possibly can. Don't be stuck in one dogma. Try everything. Do explore. Have fun. You know, we'll go back to if you know if now is the most important time. You know, you could be dead tomorrow. You could be dead in 100 years. So enjoy it. Explore things. Play with things. You know, try other things. Don't get stuck in a rut because you'll just keep going down the wrong way.
Now, I do want to flip this coin a bit because I think it's important to also know that if I'm, like, say, for instance, if I have, like, someone come to me like, Mike, this new spirituality, it's about jumping out of airplanes without parachutes, right? I want to tell that person, no, like, that is wrong, don't do that, right? And I think it is important to start giving you, like, there's always some truth, even in the stuff that may be contrary to what you're receiving. You know, it's important to take it all in because, you know, if we want to get as much feedback as possible. Even the negative stuff can tell us something that we may not be seeing. Like, you know, this is where, like, you know, if we're going into a situation that could cause us more harm, we want to be sure that we're taking on, we're not looking at them as denying us the opportunity, but them, you know, is this concern or is this coming from a place of some other kind of fear, more, you know, a fear that's based in jealousy or a fear that's based in envy. Like, where is this fear coming from, and is it something I should be acknowledging? You know, it's like there should be checks and balances and discernment in those processes because, you know, I would want someone to tell me, Mike, you know, jumping out of airplanes without parachute is probably a really stupid idea. You know, like, you may be able to flap, you may meditate into levitating, but let's, like, not go there yet. Like, let's start, like, right here and work our way.
I was just reading about this in a Joseph Campbell book. One of the tests that Jesus goes through with the devil is the devil takes him up to the top of a holy building and is like, jump off, God will support you. And Jesus goes, no, I'm not going to. And the point of the story is because he's still a human being on earth. That is the point of the story. He's still Jesus in all of his Jesus-y goodness, but he's still a human being who is incarnate on this plane, who still needs to play by the rules of being incarnate on this plane. Like, one of the things that stimulates me, that I take full responsibility as for, is when I know some super spiritual people who are like, no, I don't need to really worry about my diet and the things that I put in my body because my vibration will take care of that. It's like, I don't know if you're there yet, but to me, I don't see how you're going to get anywhere in spirituality by denying a part of yourself or denying a universal truth. And at this point, it seems to be a universal truth that if you eat white people food, you'll get sick. And if you eat healthy food, you won't get as sick. So to deny yourself that like, I'm so holy that I won't fall and hurt myself. I've transcended being human so much. They've become the angel instead of the ape. And really, to quote Terry Pratchett, we're supposed to be where the rising ape meets the falling angel. You find humans. You know, and to think that we're more angel or more ape is ultimately, I think, a flaw that we're all struggling to address in some form, because we vacillate between that holy and that unholy so well, you know, in our day-to-day consciousness with the monkey mind and all that. So again, I forgot where I was going, so I should probably stop talking.
Well, I do think, too, that, you know, when sometimes it is important to speak up, and I think that's even more important. You know, like, when I was working for PETA as an activist, it's important to speak up around the injustice and cruelty in the world. It's important to let your voice be heard as you awaken to, like, say, for instance, like here in the South, for instance, a lot of people are indoctrinated into racism in ways. And then once you wake up to the idea, well, you know what, this isn't right, then you may have very difficult conversations with the people you care with because you're speaking from a place of justice, because we have to have that conversation. So sometimes that's where and activism and spirituality all come back together again. And sometimes we have to have those conversations, because to deny conversations, you know, there's that great quote, silence only helps the oppressors, never the oppressed. Mm-hmm. So we have to lend our voice sometimes, and we have to speak up. even if you're the only one speaking. And there's another great quote, I forget who says it, but it's speak up even if your voice cracks. You know,
Nice.
even if you're the only one, you have to speak up. And this is something that came up recently, and there was a talk about sometimes abuse of power in yoga classes, where men will sometimes come over and touch women very inappropriately in a yoga class. And the speaker was saying it's important at that moment to let your voice be heard and say, okay. And sometimes you have to speak up and say it in that very public space. This is not okay. Mm-hmm. You're crossing a boundary and you're crossing a line. That's not okay. Sometimes it's important in, like, you're in a spiritual community or a group and you see transphobic things happen, or you see racism, and to say, look, this isn't okay. This is not okay, and I'm going to let you know that it's not okay. Because we have to sometimes be a little bit more aggressive with those messages. Because if we don't speak up, we're condoning the behavior. So it all comes back to discernment, though, and I think that's where it's important to really understand what it is that you hope to start working with on your journey. Like, where are you? Are you the activist, or are you the edge walker, or are you someone who's in the trenches? Or where are you? And it's okay to be right where you are. But understanding those roles and identities a bit give us to begin actualizing some of that work. Like for me, I'm the activist. Even in readings, people will use words, and I'll challenge them on those words. And it's important to do that work of challenging and inviting people to their own story in a way that lets them take ownership of it in a positive way.
Totally. Something I would like. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sometimes we just got call out stuff. That's also sacred. Calling out hypocrisy.
Yeah. Totally. I wanted to add something. Sometimes for me, like, I don't handle stress well, so sometimes I think that it's important that we all remember, for those of you who are listening, that sometimes your job is to support the people. Sometimes your job is to, in an army, they need cooks. They need someone to take care of their gear. Say you're not emotionally strong enough to go out and fight the war and be on the front line at protests, or calling out evil injustices by screaming at the top of your voice about it. You can be supporting those people. Mm-hmm. You can be behind the lines, giving them the love that they need to back them up. Even though you're not necessarily at this point in your journey strong enough to be one of those people, to be that voice, you can still contribute. I've built a business I'm building a business on supporting people's myths, making touchstones to remind them of who they are at their core, to make them stronger, so when they go out into the world, they're wearing physical clothes that are based on their myths that make them armored against the world. I can't be going out, like, I'm not emotionally strong enough, I'm far too stress reactive because I'm autistic, to be able to go out there and be arguing with some, racist about like some really closed-minded, really in pain racist. I can't handle it. My consciousness can't handle it. But I can armor 100 people who can go out and do it even stronger because I've given them armor. So not to get lost in that, well, I'm not capable of doing this grandiose, great deed to fight to help in the cause. The Army needs food. The Army needs a place to stay. The Army needs support. And that's what the Army of Light. So I just wanted to throw that in of, like, there are a million ways that you can make a difference. And even if you're not directly impacting the change, you can be an active support group for those who are impacting the change. So wherever you're at, you can contribute somehow in a way that will be safe and constructive and promote growth for you, even if you're not in the trenches. Mm-hmm. That's basically.
Absolutely. When I worked for PETA, it's like I was on the front lines. Like, my job was to go out to scream and yell and to do the fancy, fantastic demonstrations. But to get there, I had people who made the signs. I had people who booked the trips. I had people who would come out and help hold those signs and make them. So it's like there's a system in place. And I think sometimes we feel like we're doing it alone. And to not be afraid to ask for help is the other half of that. Like, knowing that there are resources out there that you can reach out through, to ask for support, because sometimes we may not feel like we're ready to take that step, but we can step into something greater by knowing, you know, I can't do that part, but I'm willing and really able to do this part over here. Or you notice people on the front lines, and we can, you know, stand in solidarity. Like we can, you know, send them some positive healing and stuff. We can do things. There are things we can do. So absolutely, I think that is an important step. Just to own your gifts in a way to let them be something that you can use in the world to manifest positivity.
Totally. And I think that there's a lot, I know that I can speak for myself. There's a lot of that, like, expectation as a spiritual warrior to really go out and really, like, you know, that concept that we have as Westerners of what a warrior is, you know, and it kind of permeates in our subconscious, and then it kind of goes out and so the idea of what a warrior is kind of loose and ill-defined in a certain way. And so I know that for myself, there was a long time where I felt like I wasn't doing that. I wasn't on the front lines. Another great example is I wasn't living for years I felt like I wasn't living in the whole flow of the universe because I wasn't brave enough to go out and be a road kid, you know, hitchhike and just go from place to place for a while. And then it took me years to come to the realization that that's not my path. My path isn't that path. That's somebody else's path. My path is a more gentle path because that's what I need to be able to grow and incubate into the person that I'm going to be, because that my stone is not made of hard enough substance to be able to withstand that sort of faceting. I would crumble and break as a stone. And so I have to acknowledge that. So acknowledging your shortcomings and your inabilities not as a limiting thing, but as a freeing thing. Like, I am more free now that I have acknowledged some of my shortcomings, like my lack of ability to handle stress well. My life has been made significantly easier because I've realized that, and I've taken steps to make my life better, knowing that I can't handle stress, so I'm not, like, intentionally putting myself in situations that I know I'm suboptimally designed to be able to handle. So honoring that fact that, you know, metaphorically, I've got a gimpy leg. I'm not going to try and run a marathon. It just wouldn't work for me. I'm going to be able to do something else amazingly well, though. Right. But not having that expectation on myself ultimately is what I'm referencing. Is I had fallen to that expectation of the should dragon, you know, the dragon that each scale is a should that we all have in our consciousness somewhere, that we all have to worry about eating us alive is all the shoulds. You should go out and do this. You should go out and do that. And that expectation that we have of ourselves as spiritual beings and what that relates to, and what we think that should manifest as instead of what it actually manifests as. Yeah. I think, too, we have to be careful that we don't allow our spirituality to move us into passivity, because sometimes it does that, you know, like, Absolutely. Oh, well, God will take care of it, or there's someone else who will do it, you know, bystander syndrome. You know, it's like if we see something that is wrong in a group, we see something racist or transphobic or homophobic or whatever, it could be all kinds of things. Oh, well, someone else will take care of it. You know, oh, God is blessed, you know, I'll pray for them. You know, it's like sometimes the call to action is calling you to action. There's a reason why we witness certain things, you know, and even in that moment, even if I am not the front lines person, every other front lines person may be busy, and it may be just my time to step into that role. So don't be afraid, you know, if the universe says, you know what, today you're front lines. Sorry. Yeah. You know, and that's the thing of acceptance is sometimes you have to be the front line. I've stepped up and had to be in the front line in different times, and I do my best. And you give it your all, and you do the very best you can, and you accept that that's the best you could do, and then you just keep going. And, you know, maybe you failed, but I know that the times where I stood by and didn't do anything helped me to realize that I didn't want to be that person, which then helped me when the time did come where it was time for me to be the frontline guy, even though it was for 5 minutes. You know, even if it was just the frontline guy for 5 minutes, not even making a career out of it, not spending my whole life doing it, just spending 5 minutes and helping to heal a situation or a rift or something like that, where you're in the heat of it, you don't want to be. No, all those experiences put together helped me to experience the totality of no, I don't want to stand by, because I've stood by. And I realized how damaging that is to me and everyone around me.
Right.
So now I'm going to act. And that fullness of experience has given me more insight than I could have had in any other way. By failing, basically what I'm saying is by my failure to stand up and be the being of light that I would have liked to have been in certain situations, it has inspired me to be able to be the being that I want to be. But I wouldn't have been able to without those failures.
And it's like I don't even really view those things as failures. I just view them as it just wasn't time. It wasn't my time to do that. It's like, you know, like we're still training, we're practicing, and it wasn't my time quite yet to step into that role, whatever it may have been, but or maybe it just wasn't even my role at all to step into. So it's acknowledging the fact that, you know, not every part of the path is for everybody, but I'm going to do the best I can with where I'm at to the highest of my ability for the greatest good of all. And being okay with that being my starting point each and every day. Like each breath we take is a starting point. You know, we're born again each time we breathe. Because there's a moment like when you exhale, like that's it. You may not inhale again. You know, it's like that could be the last one. And so let me just take each breath as an opportunity to answer the invitation of life to show up in whatever way life is asking me to show up. Like, you know, there was many years I was completely on the front lines, and you know, I'm not as on the front lines as I used to be, but what I brought from the front lines I can now take into the other work that I do. So our roles will continue to shift and flow and ebb and grow and evolve as we step through the journey. But you know, I think that's the beautiful part about it all is we don't have to know everything right now. We don't have to have it all figured out. It can just be as it is right now, and that can be it.
I think when we figure it out, we're dead. I think that's you figure it out, and you're done.
And even then, we still might not figure it out. Who knows? You know?
Well, you know, that's it. It's like if you weren't here to learn anything, then you'd be dead. I mean, isn't that how it works? When the lesson's done, the classroom's shut, and that's, you know, and then you move on to the next lesson. Well,
next lesson.
What were you gonna say, Boggy?
I just said, you know, the whole, you know, in that viewpoint, it's the next life. There's the next set of lessons. You know, well, it depends on what you feel we believe is after this one. But you know, it's like this life is important. Just like the next one, the Taoist twist, Taoist joke. Mm-hmm. So the whole point is, you know, you do everything you can. Just because you feel that you know you're not a person in the front line doesn't mean that the universe will agree with that. And there will be times you will find yourself maybe possibly kicking and screaming, but being put into the spotlight. You know. The Wheel of Fortune in the tarot cards, you know, is the whole point is the flux of life is that sooner or later you will be in the spotlight. Whether you want to be or not, you will be. Now that spotlight could just be amongst your friends or in a town hall or amongst 50,000 people or the whole planet. But in essence, the bigger the down, the bigger the up. Everything within your life, within certain parameters, everything has a moment, and you know you will, in essence, in Taoism Buddhism, in essence, you will feel everything that exists within that lifetime. It may be minute, it may be within your dream, it may be something that lasts for a long time, but you will feel it. And the point in both Buddhism and Taoism is the point of living that moment, feeling that moment, being there and experiencing it. Because we sort of said in you know, as this conversation goes on, we sort of said before, is this thing, you know, lost moments, times when you know people are about and and then something happens, they're no longer here. That moment will always be lost to degrees. So the, you know, trying to living as if every day is your last. So make the best of every opportunity. you find yourself in that spotlight and you don't necessarily want to be in that spotlight. So, but okay, let's be honest. Let's be who I am and just go for it. And then have a heart attack afterwards once you realise what you've done. But it's I feel taking those opportunities, being in that moment, living it. Sometimes you're not ready for it, but it doesn't mean the universe doesn't think you are.
Yeah. Accepting the gift, whether we think we're ready for the gift or not.
Well, the gift is there. The gift is there. The gift is in you. You are the gift. You know, it's whether you are everything you will be. You already are. It's just like a flower. It just needs to unfurl, just to open up. And sometimes that takes encouragement. And if you're not opening yourself or moving to that situation, the universe will do it for you. Or if you're lucky, your friends will do it for you. But yeah, sometimes you need encouragement, and that can come in not necessarily the most favourable way that you may feel, but the universe will do what it needs to do to make things happen. That's what I feel.
It always does.
I absolutely.
But hey, what do I know?
Yeah.
Darris, backup line.
So I was.
Right,
What were you gonna say?
No. You say first.
Okay. I was just gonna say about the whole thing about you touched on Facebook and recognition and all that, and there's a great book I quote it all the time, Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication. If you've never read it, read it. It'll change your life. Something he points out in there is how we're trained ever since we're little kids to present information to a higher power to say, haven't we done good enough? You know, that's what we're tested in school. You have a test. You learn the information. And you have to hold up your knowledge to the higher power and say, am I acceptable? Is this, you know, am I deemed worthy? So I think that's the consciousness that we get trained in. So we're growing up, you know, we have tests. There's all these tests. There's school tests. There's driver's license tests. There's all these tests that we have to present our knowledge or to a certain extent, our being to a higher power that will then sit in judgment over us and deem us whether we're worthy or not. Now, I think that consciousness is bred into us, and Facebook, to me, is a great, fantastic example of that manifesting in adults. Are you good enough? How many likes did you get? Are you measuring up to the societal standards? I've heard people in restaurants say, "Oh, I wish I was so and so." I look at their life on Facebook and it seems so wonderful. It's an unhealthy manifestation of a thought process that we're trained in as young children. And to me, I mean, I catch it in myself. You know, of that desire to get more likes, to be more accepted, because ultimately we all have a need to be accepted by the tribe that we live in, and since our tribe has become the world now, basically, that is one form of the manifestation. But more I see it as this fundamental gap that I've noticed in my own consciousness of feeling this need, like we need to show ourselves and what we've done and the work that we've done and make ourselves like presentable for some higher power that we don't even understand what it is. And most of the time, up until like the last couple of years, I wasn't even conscious that I had that desire. But you do a deed, and for me, I had this desire to tell the world about it because I wanted the recognition from the higher source of, yes, you did a good job, you did what you were supposed to, you passed the test in the school system, and so therefore you are deemed worthy enough to be metaphorically a good person. And I really feel like that's super prevalent with the Facebook thing, with people wanting likes and people needing that recognition of their life deeds and to have them to ultimately seeking validation outside of the self. And this is just how it's manifesting currently. Thoughts? Anyone?
Yeah, I think it is part of that. I think we have this way to connect, this ability to connect to each other, but it also disconnects us in much more profound ways. There's an illusion of connection.
Yes.
With Facebook.
There's
an illusion of action with Facebook. There's an illusion that we are bigger than we are with social media. But it really doesn't do anything to create deeper, lasting connections that require tangibility, whether that be through voice, through touch, through interpersonal communication with someone. I think we've gotten so far away from that that people don't know how to have honest conversations with each other, because on Facebook you can just delete, you can block, you can just walk away from the conversation, whereas in real life we're able to sense the emotions that our words are bringing up in others, which is why cyberbullying is so much easier than bullying in real life.
Totally, because you don't have to see the pain on their face.
Right. You can troll so much easier on Facebook than you can in real life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same. It's like why guns made violence so much more. You lost that personal effect of violence, of having to look the other person in the eye while you were causing them pain of the violence.
Right.
So with that stripped away, absolutely, you see that. Something that I've seen, and I talk about to people like in the store. I strike up random conversations with people in Safeway about how we don't talk to each other anymore. You have, I don't know if this is happening in other countries, but in the U.S., at least over here, we have an epidemic of U-scans where there's no longer a cashier to ring your items up. There's a little basically computer terminal where you do it yourself. The line at the U-scan is always longer than the line at the registers because people don't want to talk to each other. You see that in drive-up windows. You see that in movie rental boxes where you can go and not talk to the person and rent a movie. It's because your need for social interaction is being met by all of your friends because you're texting everyone, you're emailing everyone, you're sharing stuff on Instagram and Facebook with everyone. And as a result, you're not talking to the people around you anymore. Because you're looking at your phone, you're still talking to people, you're still talking to your friend on Facebook, or you're Instagramming something or whatever, but you're not talking to the person who's standing next to you in the grocery aisle.
Right.
You're not standing there talking to the cashier who's ringing up your items anymore. So it's become it's become really inclusive now. Like you don't talk to people anymore because you have your friends to talk to because you can talk to them. Like I generally try to strike up with people, conversations with people over 50 or 60 about that, because they're from the times when that was all you did was talk to the people. You didn't call other people because it was too expensive to call someone. You wrote them a letter or you talked to the people you were surrounded by, and that gives so much more expansion because you're not just sitting in a choir. Preaching to the choir already knows everything that you say, basically, because they're there every week. You need to be out there preaching to someone who doesn't know everything you have to say, who hasn't heard your opinion 1,000 times, and hasn't heard it in 1,000 times in 1,000 tired ways. You need to go out and interact with fresh people and new people and really share that idea and that concept. Because otherwise, it's like you said, you share something on Facebook. All your friends agree with you, you all push the like button, and that's the end of the conversation and the end of the topic, and there's no expansion on it. And ultimately, you're just all agreeing with each other. So you're not out there sharing an idea with someone who hasn't heard that idea. Because you're all friends, that's why you're friends, is because you have the same concepts, the same ideas, the same goals, the same. So there's that lack of sharing now that is now more prevalent than it's ever been before because we're all part of the same community. Because of the global the sense of global community. It's not just a tribe anymore where everyone, where there's maybe 20 people, and of course you're going to talk to everybody in your tribe because they're the only people that are around. So there's that distinct lack of connectedness with other humans at this time that is just being made worse. That every new, from my perspective, every new thing that comes out, whether that's Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or I can't keep track of them all. There's too many. I don't do them. Because it's just another way for you to communicate and get your needs met of feeling special because your friends will help you feel special. But ultimately, you're not going to get anywhere. There's no growth. It's the snake eating its own tail. It's just a continual process. And in a continual process like that, there's not enough inconsistency to really stimulate growth.
Right.
when you're always living in 2 seasons, you're not going to get the extreme of the 4 seasons that you need for life to really.
Right. You know, I think it's important to look at, you know, what we're gaining and what we're losing, to do it honestly. You know.
Because there's a great, I mean, and you know, I'll talk great things about Facebook. I've met so many amazing people. Like Boggy, I know because of Facebook. And I've met you because of Facebook. And I met Michelle because of Facebook. And there's a huge, profound, you know, that's like everything. It's a double-edged sword. It's a great tool, but if you misuse that tool, ooh, dangerous stuff, you know? So again, that all comes back to finding the way, finding the balance, and finding that, like, that proper, that, like, how much time do you spend on Facebook? Who do you talk to on how you interact with that new thing that's a part of your life, and find the balance of it, because there's no mythology to teach us anything anymore, because society is changing too quickly. Joseph Campbell talks about this, about how, you know, when you have a culture that takes 10,000 years to develop and change something small, mythology has no problem keeping up with that and giving you the moral lessons and the moral guidelines that you need to live in that state. But there's no moral guidelines for there's no story to illustrate to you how much time you should spend on Facebook every day. So we're missing these myths, we're missing these stories to teach us how to interact in this world, so we have to make it up. So now it's even more, we have even more responsibility for ourselves. And also another thing, very Taoist philosophy, is that since we now live in a shattered world, and a shattered society, we have to do the thinking for ourselves.
Hey.
You know, you can't. Oh, hi, Michelle. You can't go to the wise woman and ask her for her advice because she's not necessarily there for you in the way that she would be there if it was a tribe. You can't go to, you know, since we all need to be able to survive on our own, we can't have the compartmentalization that we used to have, where one guy's life was about hunting, one guy's life was about fishing, one guy's life was about understanding one thing, so he could spend his whole life studying that one thing and becoming more powerful in that one thing, and having the symbiotic relationship where he would come to you for the one thing that you were really, really good at and had spent your whole life training in, and you knew that it would continue this harmonic flow in the tribe. Since we lost that, since we don't have that, we have to just figure out so many things for ourselves so quickly. What are you doing, Boggy? I see you up to something.
We're conspiring to wrap up the show.
doing the boggy Zen one.
Awesome. All right, so
so all that to say, we have no myth for teaching us how to live now, and we're all suffering because of it, because we have to survive as an individual instead of a tribe, because our tribe has become a nation, and we no longer have that access to those things. I'll shut up now. The show.
Okay, thank you. So Michael, for our people who want to ask you more questions and do all that, how do they get in touch with you?
So there are a few ways. You can find me on my website, michaelbrazell.com, MichaelBrazell.com. You can find me on Facebook, facebook.com/BhaktTWitch, BhaktTiWitch. You can email me directly at michael@michaelbrazell.com. I try to get back to everyone. I'm pretty receptive to folks who need guidance. I do one-on-one counseling sessions. I teach yoga. I travel. If you're in South Carolina or Washington, D.C., we can always connect there, and that's where my home bases are. But michaelbrazell.com is the easiest way to keep in touch with all the stuff that's happening. And I know that Sifu placed my YouTube and other links down in the show notes. So find me wherever. You know, I'm everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
I'll just put it on the comment as well. I just wanted to say we've had some great comments. The great mighty Skull Babylon Shifters should be seeing him later. Very lovely. Love B said this is such an amazing discussion. I appreciate you all. Love and gratitude. So love and gratitude. Love, Chin, back to you. Lovely. Nikki Internal also saying it's great to see the Michael's actual face for a change, because I heard him a lot on the Skull Babylon channel. Who else? Also, Andrea87 just said love and love to all. So thank you very much for all your messages. And you know, well, I've said it before. You know, you are an inspiration to me. You inspired. You're one of the inspirations for this show. You know, you're a great person, and thank you for your great wisdom. Thank you for such a great show.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I definitely appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate seeing others put their voices into the world, and for the work that you all are doing together here collectively, and just realize how important it is. I don't think sometimes you know, we often receive a lot of gratitude for putting these things out, but I do want to tell you how grateful I am to see it, and how lucky we are to have you all putting this beautiful content out into the world. So thank you for the work that you do.
As you said yourself, it's amazing how time I'm like, oh yeah, I watched the show, and it's like, you know, yeah, to us this is the now, but this now will happen again with somebody else sometime in the future. I love mind twisters like that, but you know, this moment right now is going to be happening again a week from now, a month from now, a year from now for somebody else. So wherever you are, whoever you are, in the future, send us a message.
We love
Talk
you.
to us. Talk to us. Past, future, back to the future. Anyway, so
Awesome.
Thank you very much to Michael's great show.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it immensely.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much,
Absolutely.
as always, the great Ethan, and to the very lovely Michelle. Thank you, past, present, and future guests. Well, actually viewers, but past viewers, that's an interesting one. But anyway, I ramble. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the show. Hope to see you again next week. So, from us, love, chi, and shen. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.